this is incredibly important that we focus on skills, and we're also encouraging young people and giving them confidence, and the event today will certainly do that.
Vandra Mishra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, I met representatives of Greater Manchester Fire Brigades Union here in the Palace of Westminster. They're currently balloting for industrial action after an inadequate pay offer of 5% was put forward, one that is well below inflation and that is unfunded, coming out of existing fire and rescue budgets. Mr. Speaker, no firefighter wants to take this course of action, but after over 11,000 job losses, including 631 full-time firefighter roles in Greater Manchester since 2010, and a pay offer that will impact local services, what are they meant to do? As such, will the Leader of the House allocate government time for a debate on increasing firefighter pay and properly investing in fire and rescue services across the country?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising these points. It is deeply regrettable, I think, that any sector feels the need to go and strike, even though there will be, again, minimum services, and of course it is rightly the policy of the fire union that if there is a major incident that people will come in and attend that. I'd suggest to him that he raise this on the 19th of December, as that is the next Home Office questions.
Holly Momby-Croft.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have many, many things to be proud of in Scunthorpe. We're very proud of Scunthorpe litter pickers and others like them who give up their free time and go out and collect litter and keep our area clean. Would my honourable friend join me in thanking them for the work that they do in the community, and would she support a debate in government time so that we can discuss how we can get rid of this scourge of littering so that we don't need them to go out and do this for us? Thank you.
The honourable lady for giving me the opportunity to thank Scunthorpe litter pickers. It sounds like they do an amazing job, and her question is timely as Monday was International Volunteers Day. I don't think we've had a debate on this issue. I think the last debate we held on this issue was around about May, so it is perhaps timely for one, and she'll know how to apply for one.
Alan Bryan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last week the Leader of the House used the trope about how powerful the Scottish Parliament is, but the reality is it isn't even the most powerful devolved Parliament within the United Kingdom. Exactly. Energy, except for nuclear, pensions, and even the Union is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. So if these powers can be devolved to Northern Ireland, why not Scotland?
The SNP have done their best not to take up powers that were given to them. I remember my frustration at DWP when they had powers to act on welfare. They would rather criticise what the Westminster government was doing than take responsibility and power that was offered to them to actually do their own thing. I wonder why that is. It's because the SNP wants power, but they don't want to be held responsible or accountable for delivering services. And I'm afraid the people of Scotland are finding them out on that.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Very sadly, the number of rough sleepers in this country has increased once again, and people are being forced to sleep rough on our streets. The cold weather is once again upon us, and organisations across the country, including Shelter, Crisis and others, will be opening shelters for people to accommodate them during the cold weather. During the pandemic, we had a position whereby dormitory-style accommodation was outlawed, quite rightly, but it meant separate rooms having to be provided for people who were rough sleeping. At the moment, I understand there's no guidance being given by the Department on what should happen now. So could we have a statement from the relevant Secretary of State on what advice is being given to those charities and organisations who will give wonderful support to the people forced to sleep rough?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this. We have, in the last few years, in part because of what happened during the pandemic, we have been able to halve rough sleeper numbers. But there is advice, I understand, on gov.uk for shelters and other facilities. And I think also that advice, there is some advice also on Shelter, the charity's website as well. But I shall write to the relevant department and make sure that that is up to date and that all such organisations are aware of it.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Further to the debate on Monday on the Code of Conduct, there have been 50 MPs taking part in this session or in the Chamber since business statements started. And if all 50 of us were taken away for a plush weekend in a hotel, or we were taken to the Brit Awards together, or we were invited by the Qatari government to a football match going on later on this week, 47 of us would have to register it in the House and declare it publicly within 28 days, along with all the details. But according to the Leader of the House's motion for Monday, 3 of us would not have to, the 3 who've been sitting on the front bench, on the Treasury front bench. The 1922 committee, the Committee on Standards, the Institute for Government and all the transparency bodies in the country have called for us to end this exemption so that all MPs are treated identically. Wouldn't that make far more sense?
I think the honourable gentleman is being slightly unfair, because in addition to the motion that we are bringing forward on House business, he will know, because I have spoken to him on several occasions, that the government is also planning on doing something on ministerial interest, which I can talk about it now, but we've got a debate on Monday, so I might leave it till then. But what I do think is important is the principle which he sets out, which there should be parity on such matters. What I don't think is reasonable is that should, and I sincerely hope this is never the case, but the honourable gentleman become a minister, that his parliamentary resources would have to be used to do things that are Whitehall's responsibility. And so what I am doing is bringing forward a practical solution to this. But on the principle, there should be parity, both in terms of transparency and on timetable.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The local plans are the foundation of our planning system. In Barton-on-Humber, in my constituency, there is a major housing development proposed, which North Lincoln Council have rejected because it is not in the local plan. But despite that, the applicant is appealing. Bearing in mind the importance of local plans to our system, surely it is quite wrong that they should be able to appeal when the local plan specifically states that this is not for residential development. Could we have a debate to discuss the importance of the local plans and how important local decision making in planning is?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his statement. If he is very clever, he may be able to shoehorn that question into the statement that follows this business statement. But failing that, he'll be able to raise this on the 9th of January at the next levelling up questions.
Barry Sherman.
Speaker, thank you. Is the Leader of the House aware? I think she must be, because this was the first day of winter where you had to scrape your car in order to drive anywhere. But the cold winter is with us. And can we have a debate on a scheme that I would like all members to adopt, and that's what I call the nosy neighbour scheme. I'm frightened this winter that little children will go to bed with no food in their tummies and no heat in their homes. And our nosy neighbour scheme in Huddersfield is where we encourage people to spot, is there a child in trouble? Is there an elderly person that's neglected? Is there a family struggling? Of course, we would like more resources to local authorities to back these schemes, but would she endorse this nosy neighbour of the very best kind?
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this, and I do think that the scheme he mentions, it does sound very good. I know organisations like the Red Cross run similar schemes, whether it's young children walking to school, checking in on older neighbours. I think this is incredibly important. One of the things that one of the benefits that came out of the awful pandemic was that neighbours started taking a greater interest in how people were in their local street, and I think we should hold on to that. So I thank him for mentioning and raising awareness of that scheme.
Anna Firth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The latest round of rail strikes announced by the RMT will ruin Christmas for many people in Southend West. From our marvellous pantomime Snow White at the Cliffs Pavilion to our age-concerned Christmas party, even the Music Man Christmas party, all will suffer as a result of these strikes. So please can we have a debate in government time on minimum rail service requirements, and will my right honourable friend condemn the Grinches at the RMT and help my constituents get their Christmas back on track?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for raising that. She will know that we have introduced the minimum service legislation, and the Prime Minister is looking at what more than that he can do on that front. And I know that it's incredibly important to the Music Man, but to also the pantomime season in Southend, that we enable people to actually get there and spend their money on local shops.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, I wonder if we could have a debate on the future of the House of Lords, given that both the former Prime Minister and indeed the Lord Speaker have made quite significant interventions this week, and perhaps it would be an idea that those of us who are actually elected to a Parliament get a chance to have our say.
Well, I think that would be an excellent topic for a debate, and probably the backbench business committee would be a good route to that. But of course, he can raise matters relating to House of Lords and other subjects at Cabinet Office questions. But given that is some time off, I shall certainly write to the Constitution team and make sure that they have heard his request.
Siobhan Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, a group of Stroud GPs have recently raised with me the issues of medicine waste and sustainability in primary care, and I'm learning that there's some big changes we need, but also some small things that will save taxpayers' money and protect the environment. And did you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that if patients are checking their prescriptions while in the building, in the surgery building, and they find an error, the medicine can be saved, but if they step foot outside and check and find an error, the medicine has to be destroyed? Completely bonkers to have that waste. I'm hoping for a Gloucestershire-led NHS public awareness campaign, but will my right honourable friend support a debate in Parliament time to raise awareness about this key issue?
I thank the honourable lady for raising this, and it certainly would make a good topic for a Westminster Hall debate, and she knows how to apply for that. But I thank her. It's these simple things that if people knew about them, they would certainly do them. So the message today is check your meds before leaving the pharmacy to save the NHS money.
Kevin Brennan.
Speaker, yesterday I went along to the Open Doors for Guide Dogs event here in the House of Commons, and I was quite shocked actually to find out that in the last 12 months 73% of guide dog users have experienced access refusal with their guide dogs. Now, they told me that using taxis is now less of a problem since it was brought into the criminal law, but there's still a great problem with other businesses, including retail. Could we have a debate about making access refusal to people with guide dogs in all businesses subject to the criminal law in the same way it is for taxis?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. I'm sure that was an excellent event that he went to. I was slightly nervous when I saw the schedule for the day that it was next door to the Cats Protection League. I thought that could go terribly wrong very quickly. Certainly I will raise this with the relevant department. It's absolutely vital that whether it's transport or whether it's restaurants and other businesses or places of work, that everyone should be able to have access, and that includes those with support animals.
Scott Benton.
And Deputy Speaker, the ONS estimates that net migration has reached over 500,000 people in the previous year. Whilst this figure includes our resettlement of Afghans, Hong Kong nationals and the temporary resettlement of Ukrainians, all of which demonstrate our hospitality as a country, we must look at the broader picture, which is that since 1997, net migration has increased by a staggering amount and has had a significant impact upon our public services services and housing demand. Will the leader find time for a full debate in government time on immigration, the impact this has had on society more generally, and how we can succeed in delivering the government's stated aim to reduce it to 100,000 per year?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. I think this is a huge concern to many members across this House. I shall certainly ask the Home Office whether they have plans to bring forward such a debate, but I would also flag with him Home Office questions on the 19th of December, where he may wish to raise this directly with the Home Secretary.
Neil Hamby.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in the Supreme Court's findings on a matter of domestic law recently, they've been criticised by academics and others for straying into international legislation on the matter of self-determination. Last week, I laid an EDM, which was published on St Andrew's Day, of the St Andrew's Day Declaration asserting the right of the sovereign people of Scotland to freely determine their political, cultural, economic and social status, according to international resolutions and law. In Westminster Hall, I pressed for clarity on specific points, but I did not get an answer, and continued support for independence is increasing in young people up to 72%. The government's policy of continued refusal and denial of democracy is not working. Is it not time that the government brought forward a debate to get into the substantive political issues which the Supreme Court recognised were separate from their legal ruling on the current devolution settlement, so that we can begin to progress this very important matter for the Scottish people?
Well, look, it is, from my understanding, it is the Scottish National Party's policy that it accepts the Supreme Court ruling, and that it says that it respects democracy. It should stop unpicking the Supreme Court ruling whilst claiming that they support it, and they should also think long and hard about whether Democrats really should adhere to the result of referendum. With regard to his other point, if there were no route to have a referendum, we would not have had one.
Order. I note that the honourable gentleman is trying to make a point of order to the effect that he's not a member of the Scottish National Party. I think that's recognised. It wouldn't be a point of order, and I'm not sure that it's relevant. He asked a question, he got an answer, and the rest is irrelevant. Sarah Atherton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituent, veteran Stephen Harvey, was due to spend his 100th birthday trapped on an acute cardiac ward despite being fit for discharge 3 months prior. He has been failed by the Welsh Labour Government's health and social care system, but thankfully, due to funding facilitated by my office, the Wrexham Mile Hospital is now Veteran Aware accredited and has a dedicated healthcare coordinator in place. Now, a birthday bash was thrown, and we're now helping to facilitate a discharge, with his family looking to England for a suitable care placement. So would the Minister join me in congratulating the Wrexham Mile Hospital's veterans team for the great work they do?
I thank and congratulate both her and her hospital for raising awareness of the particular issues facing veterans, and also getting this gallant gentleman the care plan he needs. We are facing, I think, very difficult situation with regard to how Welsh Labour are running the health service, but anything that we can do to ensure that patients are getting the care that they need and the care that they need out in the community as well is very welcome, and I thank her.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, the Secretary of State, who I see is in his place, made a significant announcement about the future of short-term holiday lets, bringing in a registration scheme which will appease the industry and landlords but won't help our residents. Could we have an urgent statement so we can scrutinise those proposals and ensure that the voice of residents is also heard in this debate?
Hear, hear.
I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that. The presence of the Secretary of State on the front bench will have saved me a stamp, and he will have heard the Honourable Lady's request.
Brandon Clark-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have two outstanding outward academies in Worksop, and they are overscribed as a result and are a testament to this government's academies policies. But we also have an outstanding independent school, Worksop College, who do some excellent partnership work with many local schools. Many parents are concerned over Labour's policy of adding 20% VAT on fees and effectively mounting an attack on aspiration. Pupils leaving the independent sector will need places in state education, depriving more children the opportunity to go to a local school. So the Independent Schools Council's report suggests the 1.7 billion they claim will raise will actually lose 400 million. So will the Leader of the House find time for a debate on the benefits to wider society of independent schools?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this, and I would say that the fact that this is being debated and the profile of this issue has been raised because of the Labour Party policy is an opportunity for the independent sector. There are some schools that do a huge amount for other schools, for their community, and this is their opportunity to talk about it.
Graham Morris.
Thank you. At the last Justice questions, the Justice Minister admitted that convictions based upon joint enterprise appear from some studies to show certain communities and minority groups are disproportionately affected. This admission was subsequently picked up and reported upon by the New York Times newspaper. Does the Leader share these concerns about how the offence of joint enterprise in UK law is being applied? And can we have a debate on whether it could be considered potentially a miscarriage of justice in future appeals?
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising it. He knows that the next questions to Justice are on the 10th of January. I'd encourage him to raise this directly with the Lord Chancellor.
James Daly.
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend make time for a debate on the recent Justice Select Committee concerning IPP prisoners? We currently have 3,000 people potentially trapped in prison indefinitely, even though their index offence did not warrant a life term, and the sentence itself was abolished in 2012. Resentencing is the appropriate course, as we face the real potential risk of somebody with a 2-year term serving the rest of their life in prison.
Very good question. This is a very important point. I thank the honourable member, who is obviously a member of the Justice Select Committee, for raising it. The government notes the recommendations in the report that his Select Committee has recently published. It's considering it and will respond shortly. And I think that Justice questions on the 10th of January are going to be very well attended indeed.
Clive Afford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Abdullah Ibais is a whistleblower jailed in Qatar for whistleblowing and taking part in an ITV documentary about the mistreatment of migrant workers. Shockingly, he was tortured on the eve of the World Cup kicking off, and FIFA have disgracefully turned their back on his plight. And there's news of yet another migrant worker dying in the last 24 hours. His family are calling for the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention to intervene in his case. So can we have a debate so that we can raise our concerns from all parts of this House about Abdullah's situation, and also condemn FIFA, not just for not raising his case, but for not contributing to a fund to compensate those families of people who have died working on projects relating to the World Cup and those that have been injured?
With regard to the particular case the honourable gentleman raises, the next Foreign Office questions is on the 13th of December, and I'd encourage him to take that case up during those questions. But I will also, on his behalf, write to the Secretary of State at DCMS, as I'm sure many members of this House will want the opportunity to talk about the tournament, FIFA, and the future of it.
Margaret Ferrier.
Deputy Speaker. At Home Office orals on the 14th of November, I raised a case my office and I have been dealing with for over a year now. The Minister for Immigration committed to looking into it, despite my team following up more than once since then. Beyond his office's initial contact, we've heard nothing. Would the Leader of the House please remind our colleague about this case so that my constituent can have some reassurance that it's being looked at urgently?
Sorry to hear that that has been the Honourable Lady's experience. If she passes the details to me, I shall make sure that someone from the Home Office is in touch with her office this afternoon.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Postal workers in my constituency and across the country do an essential job at the heart of our communities, even working, as we know, through the pandemic to keep people connected. Threatened with worsening pay and conditions, and now with jobs threatened by the Royal Mail as they want to cut 10,000 positions. Can we have a debate on why and how the government can allow the Royal Mail to turn its back on hard-working staff in this way during a cost of living crisis that is really unsatisfactory, and the government really must do more to support postal workers in our country?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising that. Clearly, there will be disruption due to that planned industrial action, and so the posting dates have, as honourable members will know, have been brought forward. It is regrettable that this action is taking place, and I would encourage him to raise these matters at the next appropriate questions.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The cost of living crisis is hitting all of our communities hard, none more so than my own in Pontypridd. But meanwhile, the government have wasted billions in taxpayers' money on unusable PPE and are refusing to bring forward the documentation highlighting this corruption.
Well said.
I recognise that there are fraud cases ongoing related to this, as the Leader of the House has already said, but can I please press her further on when, how and in what format these documents will be published, given the humble address that was passed by the Labour Party earlier this week?
Well said, Alex.
I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that. I would just again refer her to my comments in my opening response to the Shadow Leader of the House. There are clearly some companies who are currently being investigated. We have to see this in the context that the vast majority of businesses, whether they were doing it on commercial terms or donating or providing services or PPE at cost, did an incredible job in very, very difficult circumstances. And if we're ever in this position again, we want businesses to have the confidence, and the message we should be sending from this House is that we want them to step up and help in the national effort. As soon as, with regard to the specifics, I certainly make the Secretary of State aware that the House wants a clearer timeline on this, but the short answer is, as soon as it is legally possible to, those documents will be released, as was our stance during the debate earlier this week.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady will know I have a great deal of respect for her when she held the post of Paymaster General, and she commissioned the report by Sir Robert Francis KC into a compensation framework for those infected and affected by the contaminated blood scandal. That was produced, that review, in March to the government. This House was told repeatedly that we would see a government response and we would have an oral statement to this House. None has been forthcoming, despite months and months of waiting. I wonder whether the Leader may use her good offices to ensure that we do have that statement next week before we end for Christmas.
I thank the Honourable Lady. The feeling is entirely mutual, and I thank her for the tremendous work that she has done with the APPG to ensure that justice is done with regard to those infected and those affected by this terrible, terrible situation. The compensation study was, as she knows, designed to make sure that government was on the front foot when the wider inquiry was concluded, and also, as has been suggested, that interim payments could also be made for those in particular hardship. I will certainly today write to the Cabinet Office and make sure they have heard the Honourable Lady's request, and I will keep her up to date with what is happening.
Patricia Gibson.
Madam Deputy Speaker.
Support for Scottish independence is now at 56%, with a majority for yes in almost all age groups, with a majority of people supporting independence in every single region of Scotland. Now, everybody in this House is well aware of the Leader of the House's views on Scottish independence, so she need not reiterate her opinion on that because we're well aware. But will she make a statement to the House setting out why she thinks, what she thinks are the reasons for this continued rising support for Scottish independence?
Well, what the Honourable Lady claims is not borne out. If you look at who people vote for across Scotland, it's not the Scottish National Party are now a single-issue party. They are not gripping the issues that are affecting people in Scotland, and there is growing disquiet at that. We've heard this week from the Auditor General with regard to financial mismanagement, millions, hundreds of millions that he cannot even account for with regard to the ferry contracts. I think that as we come out of the pandemic, as we want our public services to be able to recover, that should be the focus of the Scottish Nationalist Government.
John Trickett.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Leader may be aware of the statement by the UN General Secretary yesterday that humanity is in danger of becoming a weapon of mass extinction. The discussions about biodiversity in Canada. But in my constituency, there is a major proposal to incursion into the Greenbelt, which will threaten 27 separate native species, including some ancient woodland. Would you find time to reaffirm the government's commitment to Greenbelt, to biodiversity, and finally come with a debate on this essential subject, which should provide a background to any planning decisions for the future?
Well, the honourable gentleman would have heard the Prime Minister's questions this week and his commitment to the Greenbelt. We also have the 2030 target to halt species decline. That is one of the planks of the government's environmental strategy, and I'm sure that being able to talk about that and its success to date will be a popular debate, and he'll know how to apply for one.
Dave Duggan.
We heard today that the final stages of the Levelling Up Bill will be discussed on Tuesday, but, Madam Deputy Speaker, Scotland wants to level out. We don't want any more Tory levelling up. We want to make our own future. So as the dust settles on the Supreme Court decision, which has triggered a shocking rise to 56% for support for independence, can we have a debate on this in the House on government time to discuss some of the central elements around Scottish independence, not the least of which would be the Leader's own views about why Scotland can elect an SNP government 4 elections in a row. The vast majority of Scottish MPs, 2/3 of Scottish MPs on these benches, 3 elections in a row are SNP or independent supporting. Does she think, and can we have a debate on this, so that we can find out what she thinks about the mindset of the Scottish people? Are they confused in their pursuit of independence? And should they just know better? Should they listen to her?
I don't think the Scottish people are confused. I think the Scottish National Party are confused, because if they're not keen on levelling up, why are they applying for levelling up funding from the UK government?
We now come to Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, Leader of the House, yesterday the Taliban introduced public executions in a very grotesque, evil ceremony at a sports stadium in Afghanistan. This is only a few weeks after the introduction of a harsh interpretation of Sharia law that is increasing pressure on ladies and women, on religious minorities and human rights defenders. Would the Leader of the House agree with me that more needs to be done to protect these vulnerable groups in Afghanistan? And can I ask the Leader of the House, because it's always very helpful when I ask these questions, for a ministerial statement on this increasingly worrying trend that illustrates that Afghanistan is guilty of some of the worst human rights abuses and persecution of ethnic and religious minorities across this whole world?
I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this extremely sad situation. I'm sure many members of the House will have seen the escalation in public punishment beatings as well as executions. particularly horrific, levelled against women. I know that we have deep ties across this House to Afghanistan, and this will be an immense concern for many members. I will certainly write to the Foreign Secretary and make sure what the Honourable Gentleman has said today is heard, and he can also raise it directly himself on the 13th of this month.
Thank you. That completes business questions. Those who wish to leave, please do so quietly. In a moment, we are going to resume proceedings on the statement started earlier by the Secretary of State for Levelling Up. Before we do so, I have put on record my dismay that the Government has failed to follow not just the clear, long-established conventions of the House, but their own rules. The Ministerial Code says a copy of the text of an oral statement should usually be shown to the opposition shortly before it is made. For this purpose, 15 copies of the statement and associated documents should be sent to the Chief Whip's office at least 45 minutes before the statement is to be made. At the same time, a copy of the final text of the oral statement should, in all cases, be sent in advance to the Speaker. The key point here is final text. It's not acceptable to provide a brief preface of a statement which is then significantly expanded upon by the Secretary of State at the dispatch box. That means the opposition has no meaningful advance notice, and this is my main concern as well, that members do not have the detail they need in a written form which they can properly ask the questions of the Minister. It is simply not acceptable and has caused the House very serious inconvenience, and it must not happen again. I have decided to allow the proceedings on the statement to continue for members to question the Secretary of State. Given the exceptional nature of this morning's events, I will call members who were not present when the Secretary of State delivered his initial statement, but who are present now. I am very grateful to Hansard for quickly producing a transcript of the Secretary of State statement, but emphasise that they should not have to be expected to do so. I now call the Shadow Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy.
Mr. Speaker, I have one question for the Secretary of State today. What on earth is he thinking? The decision to greenlight the reopening of the Woodhouse Colliery is bad. It's bad policy and it's bad politics. It is the latest in a string of absurd decisions from a government in chaos, causing chaos in this chamber and causing chaos out there in the country, in office but not in power. This mine will produce coking coal used for steel, not for electricity generation. So as he has had to admit today, to claim it helps safeguard our energy security is a nonsense. But it gets worse. The two big steel producers, Tata and British Steel, are phasing out this coal in favour of lower carbon production methods, so that by the mid-2030s, at best, the UK will use less than 10% of the output of the mine. Across the world, demand for this coal is projected to fall off a cliff by 88% by 2050. People in Cumbria deserve a long-term future, lasting, well-paid jobs that power us through the next century. But instead, they are saddled with a weak, short-sighted, unambitious government who only 2 months ago rejected a plan to bring new nuclear to Cumbria, which would have created not 500 short-term jobs, but 10,000 jobs for the long term. And he is supposed to be the Secretary of State for levelling up. The Tories were once the party of conservation. Now they're the party of environmental vandalism. And he can fiddle the figures all he likes, but the reality is that this mine is projected to increase emissions by 0.4 million tonnes a year, and that's from his own advisers in government. It is the equivalent of putting 200,000 more cars on the road every single year. Right. It flies in the face of Britain's net zero objectives, contradicts the UK's aims as a COP26 president, and undermines their 2019 manifesto. It's chaos, isn't it? Successive Secretaries of State contradicting each other. The government's own independent advisor on climate change condemning the decision as indefensible, even as he stands here trying to defend it. He told us earlier today that coal has no part to play in future power generation. He can't even agree with himself. No leadership abroad, no leadership at home, unable to lead even in his own party. And I hope that he'll at least reassure the House today that this bizarre decision, which he cannot even defend himself, was not part of a deal to buy off backbenchers after his U-turn earlier this week on onshore wind. Mr. Speaker, people in Britain deserve better. Right across the country are communities like mine in Wigan, across Yorkshire, Lancashire and Cumbria, who are proud of our mining heritage and the contribution we made to this country. But we want a government that looks forwards and matches our ambition so that through clean energy, our young people can power us through the next century like their parents and grandparents powered us through the last. Where is the ambition? Where is the leadership? Where is the government?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you also for your ruling earlier, and I apologise to you and to the House. No discourtesy was intended, and I do appreciate the importance of maintaining the courtesies of the House, particularly with regard to statements. As I mentioned earlier, the context of this statement is a quasi-judicial process and a planning application. So while I always admire the Honourable Lady's rhetoric, and when she asks the rhetorical question, where is the ambition and where is the leadership, I think we all know where the ambition and where the leadership is, and it's sitting right across from me. But let me turn to the substantive. Let me turn to the substantive matter. The Honourable Lady will have her own views on future demand for coking coal, but in her question I fear that she elided the difference between coking coal used for metallurgical purposes and coal used for energy generation. It is clear, the inspector's report makes clear, that this coal is not being used for energy purposes. It is purely being used for metallurgical purposes for the manufacture of steel. It is also the case, of course, that we will need steel for decades to come, including in the renewables sector. How else do we ensure that we supply all of the ingredients necessary for onshore wind and for other renewable energy materials without the use of steel? If the Honourable Lady or anyone else in this House has an answer, I and millions of scientists would love to hear it. I think it is also important to look, as I have in detail, at the inspector's report. It is the case that the inspector makes clear, as he does on page 239 in paragraph 21.37, that in all of the scenarios and forecasts presented to him, there was a continued demand for coking coal for a number of decades. And the inspector also made clear that at the moment, imports of coking coal into this country come from Australia, USA, and Russia. It is also the case, as I pointed out in the statement, and as the inspector makes clear, that no evidence exists, no evidence was provided to suggest that there are any other metallurgical coal mines in the world that aspire to be net zero in the way that the Whitehaven development would do. And again, the inspector makes clear that the development would, in his own words, to some extent support the transition to a low-carbon future as a consequence of the provision of a currently needed resource from a mine that aspires to be net zero. The European Commission is clear that coking coal is a critical part of steel and that steel is necessary to the future of Europe. It is also the case that we recognise that the demand for this coking coal, both in the United Kingdom and in Europe, is better supplied from a net zero mine than from other alternatives. This decision, as the inspector makes clear, will also be responsible for high-skilled, high-value jobs in Cumbria alongside other jobs in the supply chain elsewhere. And that is without prejudice to the other investment that the government is making in clean, green energy sources alongside it. The inspector's report is clear, and I would stress to every member of the House that in responding to the Honourable Lady's questions, I would urge everyone to read the inspector's report in full, alongside my decision letter. Those 350 pages lay out the evidence, they present the arguments for and against the decision. The inspector, an independent planning expert, has concluded that this development should go ahead, and I agree with him.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for the leadership he has shown on this matter, cutting through the noise from the opposition and implementing the planning inspector's decision, which acknowledges the ongoing need for coking coal, the lack of alternatives to coking coal in steelmaking. And I and my constituents in Workington can't understand why today's Labour Party feel the need to campaign against UK supply chain, against local jobs, and for further emissions through the importation of this necessary coking coal. Can he?
Well, I'm very, very grateful to my honourable friend. Again, he draws attention to the importance of paying close attention to the inspector's report, and indeed the inspector makes clear that under the industrial decarbonisation strategy which Bayes produced and which I believe has been endorsed across the House, it explicitly does not rule out the use of coking coal in an integrated steelmaking process together with carbon capture and storage as a net zero compliant option going forward. And it is on that basis, on the basis of existing policy and the inspector's recommendation, that I have made my decision. As he points out, others, indeed others from other parties, may make the decision on a party political ground. Yeah. The decision that we have made is purely on the basis of the evidence in front of us.
SNP spokesperson Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This decision has been condemned by the Chair of the Committee on Climate Change, and Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Committee on Climate Change, retweeted that this is climate vandalism and economic incompetence on a scale difficult to believe. The International Energy Agency previously stated no further fossil fuel projects can be built if net zero is to be achieved by 2050, and OECD countries need to end the use of coal by 2030, so why licence this mine to 2049? Ron Doolan, a former Chief Executive of British Steel, called it a completely unnecessary step for the British steel industry. Chris MacDonald, Chief Executive of the Materials Processing Institute Research Centre, previously advised that British Steel couldn't use this coal because it's not the right quality. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, 85% of this coal is going to be exported, so talking about cancelling imports is a complete red herring. What we're doing, we're increasing our carbon footprint to support industry in the EU. It's illogical, and we know that demand for coking coal will actually fall as the EU is further ahead in development of green steel. Where's the UK progress in green steel? Coking coal is not even identified in the UK's critical mineral strategy, nor the National Security Investment Act, although it is a critical mineral for the EU, but clearly this mine is not needed for the UK. So given this decision, what steps have been taken to rapidly accelerate the net zero pathway, such as changing the Scottish CCS cluster to Track 1 status? He hides behind the recommendations of the Planning Inspectorate. Why did his government override the Planning Inspectorate when it came to Sizewell C? This coking coal isn't critical for the UK. It's going to be exports. So why has he made this decision just to appease Tory backbench climate change cynics?
Again, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his questions. And I note again that he quotes a number of individuals and draws explicitly, he was good enough to acknowledge, party political conclusions. I relied on the inspector's report and on the evidence in front of me. As I explained in my decision letter, no evidence was provided to suggest that any other metallurgical coal mine in the world aspires to be net zero, so the proposed mine is likely to be much better placed to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions than from comparative mining operations around the world. On that basis, it is entirely in keeping with our net zero commitments, and indeed with a commitment not just to jobs but to the environment, to approve the inspector's case.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now I speak as an ex-miner and a net zero champion in this place. But I remember a time when the Labour Party opposite stood shoulder to shoulder, side by side, with the coal mining communities in our great country. But their treachery has taken a new twist. They've turned their back on the Red Wall and the coal mining communities. But does my right honourable friend agree with the honourable member for Doncaster North, who is not in his place at the moment, who in 2015 said, when his own Hatfield colliery was due to be closed, that we should not be importing coal for the Drax power station from places like Russia and Colombia? We should be mining it on our own doorstep.
Correct. He was correct. Well, My honourable friend makes an important point. The member for Doncaster North's comments are on the record in Hansard, and I think are a valuable contribution to this debate.
John Trickett.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and probably the Secretary of State is aware of the statement yesterday by the Secretary General of the United Nations, who said that multinational corporations are making ecosystems into playthings of profit. Now, the Secretary of State has praised the inspector's report, and I accept what the inspector said. However, he provides a framework for the Planning Inspectorate. And will he not now at least say he will review the whole of our planning frameworks to try to protect wildlife, ecosystems and biodiversity as well as Greenbelt?
Hear, hear. Okay.
Well, first of all, setting aside specifically the decision here where the inspector's report speaks for itself, and I would urge the honourable member and others to read it in full. On the broader point he makes about planning policy, we are bringing forward changes to the National Planning Policy Framework explicitly to defend the Greenbelt, to safeguard biodiversity and to introduce biodiversity net gain. Those changes that we brought forward were shared in a dear colleague letter that I sent to every member of the House of Commons. They attracted widespread support from Conservative MPs, but were denounced from the dispatch box yesterday by the Leader of the Opposition. So, again, I'm very grateful, because I've got enormous affection and respect for the honourable gentleman for his commitment to the environment. Perhaps he could have a word with the right honourable member for Holborn and St Pancras and encourage him to take a greener approach towards planning and development overall.
Holly Mumby-Croft.
Can I really welcome this news, and that the Secretary of State has found that he does agree with the views of the Independent Planning Inspectorate. And can I congratulate warmly my honourable friend, the member for Workington, and others who have campaigned so effectively on this issue. I know I, for one, will sleep easier in my bed, knowing that we have recovered a UK-based capability to supply what is an incredibly important specialist kind of coal. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the government was always keep in the forefront of its mind the importance of certain industries and materials for our national resilience and our strategic capabilities? And he knows, as always, I'm talking about steel.
Secretary of State.
On this side of the House, we have had iron ladies, but there is no better champion of steel than my honourable friend. Whether it is in Scunthorpe or Port Talbot, jobs depend on the future of our steel industry. Steel is a critical strategic component of our future economy. Steel will be necessary as we make the transition to net zero. It is in that context, following the inspector's report and following the need for coking coal, as he points out, according to experts, for decades to come, that I have agreed with the inspector and am convinced that his recommendation for this mine is right.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In recent weeks, we've had the Climate Change Minister almost literally gaslighting the public by claiming fracking and the new oil and gas licences for extraction in the North Sea are green measures. Now the Secretary of State is trying to make the same claim about opening a new coal mine. Can he confirm that when he tries to claim that this is a net zero coal mine, it doesn't take into account the actual burning of the coal?
Secretary of State.
There are two separate points, and the honourable lady is absolutely right. There is both the operation of the mine itself and then the future usage of the coal. And the inspector analyses both. The recommendations he lays out weighed with me as I made that decision.
Andrew Jones.
Speaker, my right honourable friend has been clear about the distinction between metallurgical coal and coal for power production. And colleagues have spoken about the wisdom of using domestically produced product rather than imported product, as just highlighted by my honourable friend from Ashfield. Will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to reconfirm the government's commitment to net zero by 2050 and also the rapid phasing out of coal for power production?
Yes, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for making that point. And it is the case that we have succeeded in the last decade or so in dramatically reducing our reliance on coal for energy generation. It constitutes, I think, only around 2% of the current mix in energy generation. Renewables constitute an increasing part of that. And as he quite rightly points out, and as I know members across the House appreciate, the coal that is being produced is metallurgical coal, which is specifically to be used in the steel-making process.
Sammy Wilson.
Madam Deputy Speaker,
I welcome this common sense and economically sound decision, one which will create jobs, will ensure that we don't have to import necessary coal, and, as the Inspector has said, will have significant national and regional economic advantages for our economy. Would the Minister agree with me that where we have indigenous resources which this economy needs, it's economically better and more honest to use those rather than import from countries with lower environmental standards and also may not be able to rely upon? But does he not find it ironic that some of those who are complaining today are the first to complain about not doing enough for poorer regions of this country, and also would be the first in line to complain if steel jobs were lost?
Secretary of State.
Well, as ever, my honourable friend makes his case very eloquently, and he's quite right to point out that the Inspector gives appropriate weight to the high-skilled, high-quality jobs that will be created as a result of this development going ahead.
Catherine Fletcher.
Madam Deputy Speaker, you know me to be a biologist and environmentalist, and I should confess to the House I get called a tree hugger by certain honourable members of this House.
Really?
But was my right honourable friend agree with me that it is the net in net zero that is the crucial thing here? And we've heard today from the opposition that this isn't green, and they are wrong, because it is better to do it on our shores and in a responsible way. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that the northwest of England has the pride, the heritage, the skills and the future to not only deliver this coking coal mine, but the future industries of 4.0?
Well, I'm tempted to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that any tree that is hugged by my honourable friend is a very lucky tree. But on the substance of the very important point that she makes, yes, in order to ensure that we have a transition to net zero, we do need to reduce our reliance on a variety of different materials, but as the Inspector makes clear, and as she quite rightly points out, the economic benefits to the North West that this development brings are also entirely consistent with our broader environmental ambitions.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Member for Reading West, the President of COP, says that 85% of this coal will be exported. Is he wrong?
The Inspector makes clear in his report that it is the case that by sourcing coal from this mine, there will be a beneficial effect in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Cumbria Planning Committee, after careful consideration, approved this planning application. The Secretary of State then called it in for an independent review. The independent planning inspector, after careful consideration of all the evidence, recommended approval. And given my confidence in my right honourable friend to be a rational man, would he not agree with me that it would be completely irrational to override the recommendations of the planning inspector and refuse this planning application, which has great benefit to the United Kingdom?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, who has a matchless knowledge of the planning process. Again, I would urge all colleagues to read my decision letter and the Inspector's report. It gives a full account of all of the evidence that was placed before him. As I said in my original statement, this planning application has given rise to strong feelings on either side, but the Inspector's report lays out a particular case, and as I read the Inspector's report and saw the conclusions that he drew, so my decision letter followed. I hope that all colleagues will have the chance to read the report and make their own judgments.
Vera Hobhouse.
Deputy Speaker, this decision is a travesty of the word transition. It is a full-blown backward step to more fossil fuel in the UK. In June, the government overturned a local planning decision to not allow drilling at Horse Hill in Surrey. Now we have mining in Cumbria. This is a trend here, and as we've heard, most of it is for export, not for local UK need or use, because the industry needs to make a profit, hence the vast quantity that it wants to explore for profit for the fossil fuel industry. If the issue is really about that the government is stuck with a quasi-judicial planning decision, isn't it high time for branch and root reform of the planning system that puts net zero at the core of every decision rather than bending to the fossil fuel industry?
Secretary of State.
Well, again, I would urge the Honourable Lady, who I know takes environmental issues seriously, to look in the Inspector's report in full, to look, for example, at paragraph 21.1.27, where the Inspector outlines there will be some, but unquantifiable, likely reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from transportation as a result of domestic production. Looking at the report in full and in the round, she will see that all of the environmental arguments, which she takes seriously, are rehearsed, considered, and then an appropriate conclusion is made. Entirely separate to the Planning Inspector's report, I would also say that I would welcome her and her party's contribution to the consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework that we have put forward. I'm sure that she will find in that a number of measures that will meet concerns that she and others have expressed in order to safeguard our environment more effectively.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, Basildon has a proud mining history, and along with many of my constituents, I'd like to praise my right honourable friend for the leadership and the pragmatism that he has shown on this issue. And there has been some concern about importing our coking coal from countries with lower environmental standards than ourselves. And of course, we need metallurgical coking coal for making steel, as has already been referred to. But now we can mine to our high environmental standards and, of course, also cut out the need for the transportation of this as well halfway across the world. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that far from having a negative effect on our own net zero ambitions, this decision actually reinforces them?
Secretary of State.
Again, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he will know how rare it is that I quote from the European Commission approvingly. However, it is the case in the Inspector's report that he quotes from the European Commission and states that the European Commission recognises, quotes, the indispensable role of coking coal during the steel industry's transition to climate neutrality. So, as my honourable friend has pointed out, expertise cited by the Inspector all points to the wisdom of allowing this mine to go ahead.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The world is meeting currently in Montreal for COP15 to deal with the pressing climate and nature crisis that we're facing. A common message from there is that coal should be kept in the ground. And it is going to be incredibly difficult for the government to convince the public at home and abroad that opening a new coal mine is dealing with that urgent climate crisis in a progressive way. His colleague, the former COP26 president, described this decision as an own goal. So can I ask the Secretary of State whether he thinks approving a new coal mine in the middle of a climate crisis will enhance or damage Britain's reputation as a global green leader?
Secretary of State.
Again, I would stress the importance of looking at what the Inspector says. He quite rightly points out that international partners are meeting in Montreal alongside the UK in order to uphold the importance of biodiversity and to help to protect species. I should point out that in paragraph 21.163 of the Inspector's report, he specifically addresses the question of biodiversity and says that he is satisfied that the supplemental undertaking given by the applicant would ensure that the proposed development would provide for a minimum net gain in biodiversity of 10% prior to the commencement of production and a further net gain to be achieved on restoration. So the Inspector took account of biodiversity in coming to his judgment, and so have I.
James Daly.
Deputy Speaker, would my honourable friend agree that the evidence before the inquiry pointed to the fact that blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace production is likely to continue in the UK and Europe to around at least 2040 and probably 2050? And therefore, if we need coking coal up to 2050, what on earth are parties in the chamber doing, arguing that we should be importing it from Russia rather than creating 500 high-paid, high-skilled jobs in Cumbria, transforming both our economy, supporting the steel industry and delivering on our levelling up promises?
Secretary of State.
Well, again, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and again, he makes a very important point. Of course, as the inspector notes, there are new alternative technologies that are being developed, which will mean that the reliance on coking coal can be reduced over time. But on the evidence put in front of the inspector, as my honourable friend points out, there will be a need for coking coal for decades to come, and it is better that that coking coal comes from a net zero metallurgical mine, of which this is the only one which the inspector is aware exists in the globe.
Claire Hannah.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a backward step, and honourable friends have rightly laid out the regressive impact environmentally and what this says about the government's seriousness on net zero. My Assembly Party colleagues used the devolved powers they had to ensure a moratorium on fracking in Northern Ireland, but there's genuine concern of the potential for this government to make similar unwanted and damaging decisions in our region in the absence of the protection of devolution. Can the Minister confirm that any decision about its extraction in Northern Ireland are for devolved ministers, where a majority of people want to keep it in the ground and want instead to see investment in renewables and their huge potential for green jobs?
Secretary of State.
I appreciate the honourable lady's position. I shan't, if she'll forgive me, get drawn into the question of executive formation in Northern Ireland. I know that everyone wants to make sure that we can make progress there, and I do take account of the importance that she quite rightly places on devolved decision-making. It is an aspiration that I share.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The opposition have no concern over European and other countries burning lignite to power their industries and rarely distinguish between thermal and metallurgical coal. So will my right honourable friend renew his commitment to evidence-based policy making and the ongoing revival of British mining and manufacturing?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm really grateful to my honourable friend. And again, the 350-page report looks at all the evidence, at the competing arguments, before coming to that conclusion. I know that he, like many colleagues, has looked closely at that report before coming to his own judgment. I would urge all colleagues across the House to do so.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And a Conservative member over there talked about the ongoing revival of coal mines. This decision is not only an act of climate vandalism, but steel industry experts say it's completely unnecessary and that the British steel industry needs green investment. So we know that when it comes to the issue of the energy crisis, securing good local well-paid jobs across the country, these things are important, but isn't investing in renewables and a national programme of housing insulation the real way to do that?
State.
Well, the government is investing in renewables, and the leadership that has been shown by the UK government and by partners across the UK in the provision of offshore wind, I think, is a demonstration of that. But as I pointed out earlier, when it comes to offshore and indeed onshore wind, a critical component in the manufacture of the turbines that we rely on is, of course, steel. If we are to continue to produce steel in future, we will need coking coal for decades to come, and it is better, the inspector concludes, that that coking coal comes from a mine which is net zero.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I commend the Secretary of State for taking this bold decision which will help to create hundreds of high-skilled, high-valued jobs in a part of the country long forgotten by the Labour Party. Does he agree with me that it would be foolish to leave strategic industries such as steel production reliant upon materials sourced from our economic competitors when we can source the materials we need here at home?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I think my honourable friend makes a very, very good point. And again, I refer back to my decision letter, where I acknowledge that the inspector makes the point at paragraph 21.121 that the effects of downstream emissions as a result of the extraction of this coal may well be considered neutral or slightly beneficial when compared with other extractive sources. And of course he's referring to the foreign sources of coal, which my honourable friend refers to.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the Minister has just admitted to my honourable friend, the member for Bristol East, that when he talks of net zero, he's not factoring the use of the coal that's extracted. I would ask the Minister, does he not respect the expertise of the member for Reading West, the former COP26 president, who has said opening a new coal mine will not only be a backward step for UK climate action, but also damage the UK's hard-won reputation through our COP26 presidency as a leader in the global fight against climate change. This is an incredibly important issue. People are really concerned about climate change. I would ask the Minister to think again.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for making her point. And again, the Inspector makes clear that whether or not we use coking coal from the UK or elsewhere, there will automatically be emissions, but it is better, taking every piece of evidence in the round, that a continued reliance on coking coal, and the Inspector makes clear that that is likely for decades to come, it is better that that coking coal comes from this mine than from other sources abroad.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for a very comprehensive and detailed statement. But can the Secretary of State confirm, and is the Secretary of State satisfied that all steps will be taken and have been taken to protect surrounding environment, and that health and safety would also be paramount, and that local people living close by have been closely and fully consulted?
Yes, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making all those points. Again, the Inspector's report, and I'm sorry to keep returning to it in one level, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think it is important to return to it, deals with all of those issues and more. And I just wanted to take the opportunity of his question to say to the House and to other interested parties that, of course, I've sought to answer every question put to me as fully as possible with reference to the Inspector's report, but nothing that I have said in this chamber in response to questions should be taken account of without also taking account all of the arguments in the Inspector's report and in my decision letter. I'm very grateful to so many colleagues for taking this important issue so seriously, and I do urge all interested parties to read the full Inspector's report in order to understand the arguments that were put to him and that he eventually judged.
Thank the Secretary of State. And we now come to the backbench debate on the 12th report of the Health and Social Care Committee, Cancer Services and the Government's response. Chair of the Committee, Steve Bryan, to move.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered the Health and Social Care Committee's report on cancer services and the Government's response to it. Now, I'm of course very grateful to the Liaison Committee for selecting this topic for debate in the Chamber today. We know that 1 in 2 people in the UK will develop cancer at some point in their lives. So it's no exaggeration to say this is an issue that affects everyone in the House, indeed everyone in the country in one way or another. It's touched my life to the worse many times, and I'll touch on that later. It's why the Health and Social Care Select Committee produced a report on cancer services earlier this year, and I pay tribute to my predecessor in that role, my right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, for his leadership in producing that work. And that statistic, that awful statistic, is why I have made cancer a priority for myself as the new chair of the committee. Now, our report found that great strides had indeed been made in improving survival from cancer, thanks to the tireless work of our scientists, our researchers, our doctors, our nurses, and others, including ministers, over many, many years. More than half of people diagnosed with cancer now live for 5 years or more, compared to only 1 in 3 people 50 years ago. But we also heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, that cancer survival in England, and indeed the rest of the UK, continues to lag behind comparable countries around the world. The International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership explained that just under 60% of people diagnosed with bowel cancer in England, for instance, will live for 5 years or more. That figure compares to 66.8% of people diagnosed with bowel cancer in Canada and almost 71% in Australia. The pattern is seen in many other cancer types, including lung cancer, which of course took our great friend James Brokenshire last year, pancreatic cancer, which took my own father, who was diagnosed in September of 2019 and was dead 3 days after the general election, that December. And ovarian cancer, which has also touched my family and so many people. We had target ovarian cancer in this House earlier this month, last month, sorry. And my good friend, the member for Washington North, I believe, who chairs that all-party group, led their reception downstairs in the Churchill room, and they launched their Pathfinder study, Faster, Further and Fairer. And that notes that 4,000 women a year still lose their lives to ovarian cancer, and I would highly recommend its excellent work, its excellent report to members. Now, we know that one of the biggest reasons for this gap in survival, that I quoted some comparative figures there, is that the NHS does tend to diagnose fewer cancers at an early stage when it is, of course, much more treatable. Early diagnosis is cancer's magic key, as has been said so many times from these benches. Now, NHS England has set a target to diagnose 75% of cancers at an early stage by 2028, compared to around 54% today. And achieving this, we say, would make a huge difference to outcomes. I agreed that target when I was the cancer minister a few years ago, and I firmly believe that it's the right target to give more people the best possible chance of surviving their cancer. But I think we need to be much more ambitious and get upstream of many cancers, and I'll return to that. Last month, the excellent Dame Callie Palmer, who's the National Cancer Director, also works at Marsden, told us in a special topical session of the Select Committee that she remained, quote, cautiously optimistic that the 75% target would be met, and told us about some great progress being made on programs like targeted lung screening. We've all heard about the supermarket checks, which is diagnosing lots of early stage lung cancers in the pilot studies, and has great promise actually. But Dame Callie's optimism, I have to say, was not entirely shared by many experts who gave evidence to our inquiry into cancer services. John Butler, a specialist in ovarian cancer, thought that it was, in his words, extremely unlikely that that 75% target would be reached. And Dr. Jeanette Dixon, an oncologist, said the NHS, her words again, were doing very badly against the target. This is a worry. Regrettably, we concluded in our work that the NHS was not on track to meet the 75% target. And I have to say it's a judgment that was shared by the committee's independent panel of experts who evaluated government progress on cancer services. Now, the government responded to us and said that it was premature to say that progress towards this target is off track. But the National Audit Office found that 56% of patients are being diagnosed at stages 1 or 2 so far this year, which is the same proportion as when I made the target in 2019. And of course, it's below the level of improvement required to reach that 3/4 target of early diagnosis by 2028. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't agree that it can ever be premature to call for more to be done to make progress on early diagnosis, when failing to achieve the target could mean so many, hundreds of thousands of people missing out on an early cancer diagnosis, and of course a better chance of living for longer and surviving their cancer. Now, the committee heard extremely powerfully why it's so important to make more and faster progress on diagnosing cancers earlier. In December 2020, Andrea Brady's daughter Jess died from stage 4 adenocarcinoma at the age of just 27 years old. Before her diagnosis, Jess had been passed from pillar to post, repeatedly consulting with multiple GPs and other clinicians before her mother was finally forced to pay for a private consultation just to get Jess a diagnosis. By that point, tragically, it was too late. Jess passed away in hospital three and a half weeks after she was diagnosed. So meeting the target of diagnosing 75% of cancers at an early stage would mean thousands of people being given a better chance of surviving their cancer, and thousands fewer families having to suffer such terrible losses. And that's why we called in our report for the then promised 10-year cancer plan to kick-start progress on early diagnosis. We called for it to consider more radical proposals on how to diagnose more cancers at an early stage and to include an associated workforce plan to reduce the diagnostic bottlenecks in the system. And there's good work ongoing, and I know the Minister will talk about this later on. New research like the NHS Galleri blood test trial could be potentially transformative. Indeed, last month our colleagues at NHS England would not be drawn on whether there is a need for a new 10-year cancer plan, as previous governments have promised. They seem to imply that the new plan wasn't needed given the focus of the long-term plan on early diagnosis. I would contest that. The consultation that was done on a new 10-year cancer plan was responded to by the sector, by charities, by Royal Colleges, by many organisations, and it has set many hairs running and great expectation about there being a future cancer plan. So I think we on the committee, and I see other members present in the House, we are concerned about that. And we're not hung up on plans. But in my experience of being a minister, the NHS loves a plan, the NHS needs a plan, and critically it allows this House to see where we are against the plan. So achieving early diagnosis is not just about what NHS England can do from the centre. It's also about improving public awareness of the many signs and symptoms of cancer across all communities. It's about making sure that GPs have good systems in place for managing patients with possible cancers and are able to refer them on for tests without barriers. It's about the continual improvement of screening programmes and hard work, really hard work in local areas to encourage people to come forward. And of course, this is one of the great promise of the new integrated care systems, working with the cancer networks, the cancer alliances, to deliver on that system population, that system early diagnosis, system prevention. And it's about focusing research and innovation on developing new ways to detect cancer, especially those which are hard to diagnose, and ensuring the NHS is set up to roll out new tests quickly. And I referred to Galleri earlier, and I mentioned earlier about upstream cancer. And we're going to be doing a piece of work next year that I loosely call Future Cancer, because it is important, of course, that we diagnose cancers early, and that is the basis of the remarks I'm making today. But at the moment, largely what we do is diagnose cancers, and then when they are symptomatic, and hopefully we catch those symptoms early and then we treat them early, and many cancers, not all, are preventable when that happens. What I'm interested in, as well as that, is future cancer. So where can we get upstream of this? Where can we use our genomics, the NHS's new genomics strategy? Where can we use biomarkers to get ahead of that? And there are big moral and ethical questions that poses to us as a society. But this should not be a reason why we don't go there. It should not be a reason why we don't have that ambition. So all of this is about making sure that there is enough staff and machines in the system to do even more tests and give many more people the best possible chance of being diagnosed with cancer at an early stage. Now, the 10-year cancer plan should look again to make sure the government is truly pulling out all the stops to get to 75% at the early stage by 28. I hope the Minister will confirm the government is still committed to doing this work. And of course, early diagnosis means little if there's not sufficient capacity to provide people with the right treatments at the right time. Unfortunately, the latest data suggests that there has been a decline in the NHS's ability to provide this treatment. Whilst the vast majority of people do still receive timely treatment following a cancer diagnosis, in September nearly 10% of people waited more than a month for their first treatment following a diagnosis, compared to less than 5% in 2019. So that's more than 2,400 people having to wait more than an entire month to begin their cancer treatment, more than double the number waiting that long 2 years prior. As the former cancer director, Professor Sir Mike Richards, a giant in this area, often says, when you're waiting for a cancer diagnosis or treatment, it's not the 31 days that really matter, it's the 31 nights. And I know that people around the country will understand that. With great pleasure.
I'm grateful, and I wish to commend the Honourable Member for Winchester, the Chair of the Select Committee, for an excellent report and for an excellent analysis of the problems and the way forward. But he did refer to the latest cancer waiting times, and it's quite timely we're having this debate today, because the new cancer stats have been published by NHS England today, and they do actually show the position's worsening. In October of this year, 39.7% of cancer patients waited beyond 62 days for cancer treatment between urgent referral and treatment. So I think there is an urgency in addressing some of the issues the Chair raises.
Indeed, and the reason why we had Dane Calley and actually Professor Peter Johnson, who's the National Clinical Director for Cancer, into the Select Committee a couple of weeks ago is because the NHS has set itself a deadline of next spring, which actually was this spring, to get back to the 62-day wait. And you know, I have everything I have crossed that they can get there, but they need to make it happen. And I know they are relentlessly focused on that. I know the Minister is relentlessly focused on that, but we've got to help them get there. So the committee also heard about the challenges facing surgery and radiotherapy services, which is rather timely that the Honourable Gentleman should intervene on me at that point. I suspect he may speak about this later. Professor Pat Price, who he and I are going to meet early in the new year, who's a consultant oncologist at Imperial College in London, told us that radiotherapy services were lacking staff and machines to be able to deliver the best possible care, and that services were struggling to deliver the level of activity needed to catch up with the cancer backlog. And I will let the Honourable Gentleman expand on that a bit later on. Professor Mike Griffin, Professor of Surgery at Newcastle University, also highlighted workforce shortages as a significant barrier to effective cancer surgery, but he also told us about the organisation of services. Now, because cancer surgery is often co-located within general, acute and emergency care, it can be subject to delay because of capacity shortage, and this was a particular problem, of course, during COVID. In some places, but not everywhere. In my trust, Hampshire Hospitals, they did a brilliant job to keep cancer surgery on track at all times through doing it off-site, and I pay tribute to Alex Whitfield and her team at Hampshire Hospitals for the organisation that they made with Sarum Road Private Hospital in particular to make sure that patients continue to get their cancer treatment. Professor Griffin called for more ring-fenced hubs to be developed so that cancer surgery can continue even when there are severe pressures on acute care, and I hope the Minister may refer to that when she winds up. Now, growing the workforce, investing over the long term in machines and IT, reorganising services to create more cancer surgery hubs, these are in the government's gift, which is why we recommended the government should consider these actions in developing the 10-year plan. Now, without a wider focus on removing the barriers to the NHS delivering the best possible cancer treatments, the potential gains of earlier diagnosis may not be realised. And given the number of people presenting with cancer at the moment, which is of course a good thing, and many of them will not have cancer. They present with suspected cancer. Many of them will not turn out to have cancer. But where they do, we need to obviously to move on that, which is why treatment is the other side of the same coin. And of course, just as further progress in early diagnosis will depend on research and innovation to develop new tests, improving cancer treatments will require new and more advanced techniques to be developed and then implemented into the NHS. We found in the committee report that the UK is a genuine world leader in research, and it is. There are unique aspects to the NHS which make it an effective partner for research organisations. We also heard there are significant barriers to researchers accessing the data they need to quick and equitable patient recruitment to clinical trials, and to staff having the time they need to take part in research. Now, the government set out several steps it's taking to improve access to data and improve flexibility for staff wanting to take part in research. This is very welcome. But research by Cancer Research UK has found that the UK's recovery from the pandemic in clinical trials continues to be outpaced by other comparable UK countries. NHS England themselves told us that supporting clinical research into cancer is not their responsibility. So it's clear a wider effort is needed to make sure cancer research taking place in the NHS is well supported and aligned with the priorities for cancer services. Another reason why the plan, I would suggest, is important. Finally, we heard there is significant variation in outcome for people diagnosed with cancer, depending in part on the type of cancer they're diagnosed with, but also demographic factors. The government told us it will be addressing these differences through the Levelling Up white paper, but also through the health disparities white paper by addressing issues like smoking and obesity, which are more prevalent in our more deprived communities. And on that, there's a story in today's press which suggests that Britain has the biggest increase of early onset diabetes in the Western world. This is a huge concern, and of course I'm not suggesting diabetes is cancer. What I'm suggesting is that we have many suggested actions to reduce obesity around junk food advertising, stuff that follows on from the sugar tax. Much of that has still not been implemented. There are rumours abound, there are always rumours abound here, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are rumours abound the government are seeking to delay junk food advertising restrictions now back until 2025. I hope that is wrong, and I would invite the Minister to respond to that when she winds up, and if not, to take that away. And on that note, somebody who I know possibly shares that view, give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I 100% agree with his concerns about potential watering down of the much needed obesity, anti-obesity measures. But does he also agree with me that it's important that we reflect what the public want? And the public are in agreement with banning advertising on TV for the particular foods that cause obesity. So if we want to keep the public on our side, surely we've got to do their wishes as well.
Yeah, and I think that is right. I mean, the public are very, very clear on this, and I get it, there are different views across this House. Those who disagree with a lot of the work that I did and my honourable friend did in government to push some of those measures to prevent obesity, I could agree with them, but then we'd both be wrong. At the end of the day, obesity is a driver of diabetes, as I just referred to. Obesity is a driver of cancers, of certain cancers. And we must take that seriously. And the Select Committee next year will be doing a huge piece of work on prevention, and we will be returning to this, and I hope ministers are aware of that. So the recognition of the importance of health in the Levelling Up white paper is very welcome. But without specific actions to address health disparities, this agenda will be at risk. So it's vital that the government takes up the prevention agenda again to stop more people from developing cancer in the first place. And I hope the Minister will have some good news for us on that front. And I would recommend that she returns to the Prevention Green Paper that we published back in 2019, which contains lots of helpful ideas in that respect. Good way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. And on that point about health disparities and levelling up, I wanted to just draw attention to the Royal Devon University Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust, which serves the Tiverton and Honiton constituency. I mean, the staff who work there do an absolutely fantastic job of cancer diagnosis. But given that the target for seeing a cancer specialist within 2 weeks is 93%, it's really tragic that only fewer than 60% of people who are served by that trust see a cancer specialist after or within 2 weeks of a referral. So does he agree with me that we really do need to level across as well as level up and think about health disparities across the country?
Yes, of course. I mean, you know, this shouldn't be a, I hate the term, this shouldn't be a postcode lottery. But what I would say is that, you know, we do have integrated care systems, we do have cancer networks, and, you know, good, strong, experienced MPs should be driving those local health economies to make sure that they level themselves up and make use of what is there in the system to make sure that they deliver as good for their population as happens in other parts of the country. And I think there could be a lot more sharing among members in this House of how we use that ability as members of Parliament to drive our systems. I do it in my area, and I'm sure he does it in his. So thank him for his intervention. So there are issues of variation affecting cancer, specifically like proper screening uptake among certain groups, lower referral rates for some cancers in certain areas, and higher rates of less survivable cancers among more deprived groups. We call for NHS England and the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities to produce an action plan for addressing disparities in cancer, and for the much talked 10-year cancer plan to include a specific action schedule for rarer and less survivable cancers. This remains for us a vital aspect of improving cancer services, and we hope that the long-term cancer plan, should one arrive, makes this part of its work. Last month, NHS England made it clear to us they were focusing on delivering the NHS long-term plan for cancer. And in many ways, this emphasis on delivery is of course welcome. And the programmes being implemented as part of that work are positive, and I've covered some of them today. But recent research from the International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership has shown that national cancer plans are worth far more than just the paper they're written on. The ICBP found that countries who've made the biggest improvements in cancer since 1995 are those who have ambitious, detailed and costed plans for improving cancer services that are open to scrutiny by those whose job it is to do that, i.e. us. Denmark and England used to be at the bottom of the league table for cancer, but thanks to consistent national cancer plans with associated long-term investment, the Danes have made rapid improvements, and they now leave us lagging a bit behind. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Health and Social Care Committee's report on cancer services, the 12th report of session, found that there are many areas where the government and the NHS are doing really good work and using the unique benefits of our National Health Service. But there are other areas, too many areas, where we can go further and faster to improve cancer services and outcomes. And I hope the government will confirm it intends to do so through the promised 10-year cancer plan when we hear from the Minister later on. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, is the Honourable Lady wanting to speak? Just so I have an indication of timings. We do have a further debate this afternoon, so to make equality of backbench contributions across the afternoon, I would advise that if colleagues were to speak for around 10 minutes, that would enable the remainders of backbench colleagues to be able to get in later. Graham Morris.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a privilege to speak in this debate, and I do want to express my appreciation for the work of the Select Committee and for the way in which the Chair of the Committee has presented the report and subsequently presented the summary and the way forward. I think it's very instructive and very informative, and I really can't disagree. I really must make some declarations of interest. I am, and have been for some time, Vice Chairman of the All-Party Group for Radiotherapy. I want to confine my remarks to radiotherapy, although I do have a broader interest also as Vice Chairman of the All-Party Group on cancer. I also, although perhaps people won't believe this, I did work for almost 15 years in an NHS diagnostic laboratory, so I have a little bit of knowledge of the front line. And I also served for 5 years as a member of the Health and Social Care Committee when I was first elected, under the chairmanship initially of Stephen Dorrell and then Sarah Wollaston. And I must say I found that one of the most interesting and rewarding of all the things I've done here in the House of Commons since I was elected. I also served on the Health and Social Care Bill, and I must thank Madam Deputy Speaker, for putting me on that committee, which was a marathon. But can I just remind members who perhaps weren't around at that time, part of the justification for those major reforms and restructuring of the National Health Service, including the commissioning of cancer services, part of the justification that was put forward by the Prime Minister and indeed the coalition at that time, was because of the poor outcomes on cancer. So the system that we have now, the structure we have now, was born out of a recognition that we needed to do better. I want to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, who chairs the all-party group, and the honourable member for Strangford, who's an absolutely assiduous advocate for improved cancer service, not just for Northern Ireland, but throughout the whole of the country. I'm delighted that this report that we're considering today is also pointing the way, signposting the way to future work, and I'm very pleased that the chair of the committee has indicated it is his intention, with the agreement of the committee, to do further work in this area as to how we might achieve that very laudable aim of 75% target by 2028. And I am very pleased that the Minister, the Honourable Member for Faversham and Mid Kent, is responding today. And as with some of our predecessors, including the Honourable Member, the Honourable Chair of the Select Committee, I'm sure that she will grow tired of me banging the drum for cancer services and for radiotherapy in particular. But there are some very important points and some very sound advice that comes not from me. I might say I'm also a cancer survivor. I've had lymphatic cancer on 3 occasions, and I've benefited from surgery, from chemotherapy and radiotherapy, so I do understand what's involved, and I do value the vast improvements that there has been in all of those pillars of cancer treatment. Now, the sexy thing on cancer services is early diagnosis, and it catches a lot of headlines, and the chair of the committee was quite right to point that out. But it goes hand in glove with having the requisite treatment capacity. And with the best will in the world, the investment, which I welcome, which is laudable, in new diagnostic hubs, will simply increase the number of patients that are in the system. And if we are going to move that on, improving outcomes for cancer patients, we simply must address the issues around cancer treatment capacity. I believe the Minister has a copy of the all-party group, indeed the charity Radiotherapy UK's 6-point plan for improving outcomes. And can I just use this opportunity to point out that we're not saying that radiotherapy is somehow in competition, but rather it complements the other pillars of cancer treatment. However, advancements in science and technology, skills, the introduction of artificial intelligence, the ability to map tumours precisely, incredible advancements in MRI scanning facilities, the ability to team them in parallel with precision radiotherapy machines gives us an opportunity to make a quantum leap in treatments to improve productivity. The cancer workforce, Madam Deputy Speaker, is very small. It's only around 6,500 nationally. They're very highly skilled, a highly motivated group of individuals who are doing a fantastic job, and I want to pay tribute to the cancer workforce, particularly those who work in the field of radiotherapy, who are holding the line at the moment and facing growing pressures in the system. And when we think as a country, we spend about 5% of our cancer budget on radiotherapy. That's not 5% of the entire NHS budget. That's 5% of the dedicated cancer budget. And if we look at international comparators, because we must do that, the European average, the OECD average, is around 9%. So we're spending about half as much as other similar developed industrial nations. And to put it into context, because sometimes we get lost with numbers and figures, but the NHS actually spends more on a